really days with a lot of inputs. But also it shows like all the discussion is like it's really good to have these opportunities to meet. The first session was really more about a bit more the high level and also how to mainstream maybe the biodiversity finance. Here in this session we want to give really some real examples. So it's a variety mixed of examples, many blended finance, and you will see the underlying toolbox they're using is the toolbox you all know. So it's always a mix of how they are setting it up a bit differently and how to adjust it to the framework, basically, but there's nothing completely new in it. So we will start, like we said here, we had at the beginning, we classified them a bit about more this financing instruments, which are going more along this line of use of proceeds financing. And then we will have some examples where it's really more linked to KPIs, where it's about managing or understanding the impact of this investment. And we see, for example, there are dedicated bonds. And especially if you also would look at the green bonds principle from ICMA, there are some activities or some parts which are actually biodiversity friendly. So it's also when we talked earlier about this biodiversity gap, one part is already in tools and things you're actually already working with. And when we're talking with companies, for example, there are also really some activities, nature capital, corporates which are working. One example is, for example, Starbucks. They have already, I think now in the meantime, launched their third sustainability bond for verified coffee purchases. Their motivation is quite obvious. The quality of the coffee depends really on the whole soil condition and whatever. So they see really this importance to help the farmers on the one side to ensure that they have still the quality. So in this area, you find it a lot about the whole food sector. And Jonas will now explain or show another example.
Exactly. So we will have a look for, I would also kindly ask my Indonesian friends over there that it's actually an example from Indonesia. It's the very first sustainability bond which has been issued in Asia. So also if you have other additional information like background information from your country, please add to that. So actually, what was the purpose of the first sustainability fund? It was really like to pioneer, to introduce sustainable nature rubber as an economic activity, but on the other hand, also hand in hand with conservation of. We are talking about in this case. Where can I have it? Okay, great. Here, talking about 88,000 hectares, which is the concession of the area, which is then divided between production, sustainable rubber production. We are talking about here 26,000 hectares, and on the other hand, the rest, for conservation purposes, but also for other programs such as community programs as well. Interesting here also to mention that we are talking also about 9,700 hectares of wildlife conservation area, which is then also really steered and monitored as well as controlled, and so that there's nothing that is really completing the use of proceeds in this case. Apart from the conservation purpose, this fund had or this bond has also had a financial interest, as I said, providing work or generating a business in the rubber industry, and for this case, really expanding the areas of producing rubber. We are talking in this case, previously project that Indonesia had a capacity of 0.8 tons per hectare. And with this project, this reached up to 1.7 tons. As Christine has already mentioned, what is really innovative for this, or what was really highlighted in this sustainability bond, is that the security, because one could say, well, the use of proceeds are not in order to generate a sustainable production of rubber, but also conservation, how this is controlled, and how revenue streams are generated here. In this case, the Michelin is very important because they had already signed an off-taker contract. So they are they will purchase 75% of the production, which is actually representing 10% of the worldwide natural 10% of the worldwide natural rubber purchases. So this was an important step, and also to provide security for potential investors in this project. Let's have a look quick about the financing structure. Or the investment structure. So the overall project had a volume of $345 million US. On the one hand, like this is the PT Royal Lesetari Utama, short RLU, has provided equity. As I said, this is a joint venture between Michelin and PT Barito Pacific. And on the other hand, this is very important as well, the Tropical Landscape Finance Facility, the TLFF, provided on the one hand a loan fund, but also a grant fund. And we are talking in this case about the sustainability bond, and this had a volume of 95 million US dollars. When you look at the structure, so we see here, this is at RLU. We have here on the one hand, the issue, they have classified or divided the bond into Class A and Class B. So we are talking about Class A of 30 million, and this sums up to 95 million US dollar. On the other hand, which is very important, also like to provide security for the investors, we have USAID, the US Agency for Development, has provided like a guarantee and up to I think it was 70 million. And also provided 50%. In this case, 50%. Provided a guarantee in the overall structure. What is very important as well for this project, which is like why it's also gaining so much interest, was because also like that they had introduced in the overall structure like also like an environment and social action plan, which was part of the loan documents, and this was then monitored. That really like with strong KPIs, which was then monitored by ADM Capital and ADM Capital. So this is the monitoring part. And last but not least, I have mentioned already that we have Michelin as the main off-taker, also again trying to reduce the risk so that to make it really attractive, this investment. Let's have a look. This is like a bit more the financing structure and how this has evolved. Let's have a look at quickly also like what are like the social dimensions and the environmental dimensions in this project as well. At the beginning, before like this loan or this sustainability bond was set up, there were a lot of challenges in the region. On the one hand, like this area where these 88,000 hectares, which I have mentioned, was an area which had historic, history of deforestation as well as conflicts about land use, for instance. On the other hand, also like the geographical situation was quite difficult, and on the other hand, like as I've mentioned, also sustainability implementation was a question how to implement this. Really like to ensure the conversation that that really like the area is really preserved and protected. What were the different measures which have been taken? There were different risk management procedures. As I said, like Christina has mentioned already previously, that when we're talking about biodiversity projects and biodiversity finance instruments, it has to be talking about long time horizon. So even like I think 5 years before, like it was started like to introduce or to implement environmental and social due diligence assessment, really like to assess previously associated risk with this project, and really like to have a good comprehensive overview, because we have said also earlier, we have also to consider also the social dimension of the situation. We cannot just say okay, this is a good area, but we also have to consider like the social dimension, so and also like the tradition, like the history of the area as well. So this was everything that was done in this ESDD. Then also what is very important, also like to provide again security for investors, was that the RLU has committed really like to apply and this was then monitored, as I mentioned earlier in the structure, the IFC performance standards. So this was a rigorous process, really like to control and to see whether like the project implementation really is in line with the IFC performance standards. And last but not least, I have mentioned it in the slide before as well, as part of the loan document or as a bond document as well, there is like the Environmental and Social Action Plan, ESAP, which is provide guidance how to implement like the environmental and social safeguards and measures and actions. Last but not least, also like as many other projects, this project also went along also like different other actions as well. So on the one hand, for example, community engagement. So the communities were really involved in the overall process. And as we have said, like also one of the main purposes was also the conservation. So this was also one of the activities which have been raised. I think this was the first project. Any questions? Or any other additional comments or suggestions? Do you see this as a good approach, or do you see like, okay, is this really like contributing like to the conservation of biodiversity in protected areas? Any thoughts? Yes.
Is there available the set of the KPIs, the result management framework applied for the project in order to assess the potential results? Is it available, or can you provide some details on this aspect? Because Christine mentioned before that measuring the impact is the main issue, so I was curious to hear more about that. Thanks.
I think they should be available because normally they're also disclosed. So we will have a look and can again, as we did it with the other reports, send it then by the WhatsApp group. Okay.
So then have a look at another example. So don't wonder they're not all in the similar structure because we also wanted to point out different features of them. This is an example from the States. It's called a conservation fund green bond. And that's something we have to learn. These type of interventions, they go under so many different names. So sometimes it's a conservation fund, a green bond, a conservation bond, and a biodiversity bond, an impact bond. So it's not a really area where you have a really defined understanding of what is actually the idea or the model behind. So that's why you need to have a closer look. In this case, we're talking about an area which is really defragmented. Yeah, exactly. So, but it's an area which also is relying on forests. So it's a sustainable forest idea. So the revenue model behind this is the purchase and the resale of working forests. And the idea to build up a sustainable forest, to really build up plantations or like really sustainable forests, and to live out of this incomes. If you closely look, it's just a normal green bond, a 10 years bond. And okay, in this side also public philanthropic investments, what we see in many areas also to kick off some of these ideas or touch on some aspects like capacity building or TA. They're often public finance included. And the idea was to really, on the one side, preserve the at-risk forest, to ensure also that the incomes are really maintained. And also it's like an economic, social impact value for the people there. It's like important for their living conditions. They have really clearly defined the use of proceeds on natural resources and sustainable land use. They are based on the ICMA green bond principles. I think it's Mauricio, as we say, Mario, correct, discussed. So in the existing ICMA principles, also in the standards, there are several areas which are covering nature-based or biodiversity solutions. In this area here, they selected two. So they are financing land conservation. So acquiring conservation properties and really try to include efficiently safeguards on these properties for wildlife and also to really improve and working with governments and working forest protection. So where you see, that's where the income is coming from. So we have a twofold goal. On the one side, there are some areas which should be just preserved for the wildlife, and the other areas is clearly with the business idea where you want to sustain, where also income from the region is coming from and which is important to sustain. And it's based on really use of proceeds from ICMA. They, by the way, we can also share them. They are public available. They're also quite transparent on the process and the evaluation. So they have a CSO, so the General Counsel, who assesses and evaluates all the project. They have additionally a review and approval by the Conservation Acquisition Committee, and then it has been to be approved by the Board of Directors. So you see again the structure we had earlier, no? Use of proceeds, process evaluation, the management. It's separately managed in this phase, and tracked by the funds finance department. So they set up a separate structure. And for the reporting, they are publishing annual reports. And some of the relevant metrics they're using in this case are permanently these words today, protected areas or water in acres also. Then GHG emissions sequestered in tons of CO2 equivalent, fauna and flora habitat protected areas, managed land by third-party sustainability certification. So that's where they use, external certification to ensure that sustainable management, forestry management systems are really in place and also implemented. Land and water restored. So that's coming for the conservation, and sustainable wood timber production in volumes. And all these is externally reviewed. So you can also see that the KPIs can be also linked to whether we are talking about the conservation part or the forestry protection part. And also you see it's based on a green bond. And we have this co-benefits, as for example here, this is a normal kind of an emission reduction approach also. So that when we were thinking about the biodiversity finance gap, that's where we have actually already quite a lot of projects where it's just not really tracked or not really emphasized what is the natural benefit out of this. Yeah, now we want to switch a bit the area, not from the forest, but go to blue bonds or blue economy. And for me, when I started with this topic, I first was really surprised what is actually blue economy. Do you know? What do you understand under blue economy? Okay, marine conservation, yeah. Someone else?
Do you hear me? Yeah. I understand for blue economy the innovative parts and disruptive parts of the economy. It's
where? Because this is blue part.
No, but they are not necessarily in the ocean. That can be anywhere.
Other idea? Yeah.
Yes, perhaps water management.
Water management, but again, where?
Protection of ecosystems, important for the water production, paramounts, for example.
So I honestly also was really confused at the beginning.
Yes, one more.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's more just a question. Do these include water and sanitation services? Or, I mean, water utilities, I'm just asking.
No, this is the right question, because I came from, blue. Blue means water, and I thought, okay, for sure, oceans, coastal areas, also fine. But I thought at the first glance, it includes all rivers and also water management and lakes. And I learned that normally people, if they're talking about blue economy, it's rather about really ocean and coastal protection. So also, I think in a way, for me was really confusing, because I think that we have a water-like circle and it kind of comes back, but apparently what the majority of the people understand is really ocean and marine ecosystems. And the second distinction I learned is that you have to define whether you're talking about blue economy or sustainable blue economy. Because basically, blue economy means just every business activity, what is happening in the ocean or coastal regions. And you all know, if you take it really seriously, like an old platform is located often in the ocean. So, but would not be really sustainable. So if you're going this direction, I found it really confusing and really important that first it has to be defined what are the activities we are talking about. And so if we, and that's why the sustainable is in the bracket, because we normally think of sustainable blue bonds. Still, there's two areas. We have the one which are, again, nature-based or nature-positive, and we have many activities which would be classified as sustainable. Just to make like the distinction, like here, sustainable fishing, agriculture, marine conservation, restoration, or coastal resilience, ocean research and innovation. There are many projects which are really nature-based or nature-positive, but there are also many coastal infrastructure, coastal offshore, and use of waste, which are sometimes sustainable, but not necessarily nature-based. A question, Evelyn?
Well, I guess we all get confused like you did, because when in CAVE we were updating our green bond framework and we introduced our blue bond framework, it's all in the same framework. So we have a blue chapter and a green chapter. But when we were developing with a consulting firm and then when we review it with our SPO, the advice was to take every water-related activity from the green side and pass it to the blue chapter. So we do have rivers and sustainable water management like sanitation and drinking water projects in our blue bond framework.
I think we will find many different examples. That's why you have then case by case really talk to each other and ensure, especially in this area, my impression was really you need to clarify first what is the common understanding on this area. But as you said, as you have your you have blue and green bonds guidelines, you can also think of sharing them with our colleagues to show them how you classify, because it also might be an interesting approach for them.
And also maybe to add, so UNEP-FI has a sustainable blue economy finance initiative. Yeah, they provide guidelines. They provide also like how to classify what activities are associated like to blue economy in this case or financing. This is also a good source like to have a look into DeepDive.
Exactly, because to just distinguish between blue, sustainable blue economy and also more nature-related, for example, like offshore and renewable energy, is not nature-based or necessarily nature-positive, because we know it has all some environmental impacts, but it would still fall under sustainable. So that's, yeah. Okay, so in principle, I think everyone understands that the idea is really to conserve marine protection, economic, social, and benefits, and address overfishing. And it's like really oceans are one really important ecosystem. Also for all our mitigation actions, the oceans are the main carbon sink we have. And with the increasing temperature, there's already the challenge that the amount of CO2 emissions the oceans are able to store is reducing, as it's like with the higher temperature. But from a nature perspective, we know all like the coral bleaching is one aspect, but in general, like with higher temperature and also the acidification, that is really impacting our our animals, our ecosystems. And we have many countries depending a lot on oceans.
Christian has a question over there.
Yes, thank you. If we can include in the category of blue bonds the financial instruments development, for example, for the protection of paramounts, what should be the category for that kind of environmental action?
I'm not familiar with the word paramount.
I mean, the paramounts are the ecosystems that generates water, fresh water. Paramounts. Paramo, right? That's the translation. Paramos. Is it correct to say paramount?
No. It's just English also my foreign language.
Even for me.
So we have picked up the understanding of the UNEP-FI sustainable bond principles, how they classify it, where they would not put them into the blue because they say it's on terrestrial. It would fall under terrestrial. But I think that's also a bit like, it has just to be clear. So I principally at the first glance, but also in my biologist, I would have also thought like all this water related should be part of this. I think that's also where we see where it goes when like banks will over time really classified like you, then it would be blue. So it's.
My point is, at the end, it's an ecosystem service involving water protection. And all those ecosystem services are involving a kind of water protection. So that's, because of that, it's a little bit confusing for me why we can include that category, that kind of environmental projects into this category.
I'm absolutely on your side. I would have also classified blue as blue related to water and everything. Well, maybe we should have figured discussions with UNEP-FI. And
maybe to add here, UNEP-FI, they're looking rather to the SDGs, so especially the SDG 14, life below water. And that's why they have like, they are classifying sustainable blue economy finance like below the roof of like this SDG, and this is like more related like to oceans. So this is like, I can say, just now share you the link to the website where you can find also the principles which I have mentioned before.
But I agree. I also was at the first glance really confused. But I think it's important that it has to be clarified. And I think in your case, you have also defined it sometimes differently. But as soon as it's transparent and everyone understands it, I think that's the first main part.
Things that what makes it okay in our case is that we describe each category in our framework. So we have a description for the green activities on the green chapter, and then in the blue ones, we describe each activity and what it means to have what type of projects in each category to be financed.
Once you align with blue bonds, then it also makes sense then to refer. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Yes, Christine, is more into the numbers. Do you have maybe some figures on the demand side of these 3 issuances in order to better understand the appetite from the market?
We will present some examples, but overall, they're also not often, it's not really clear, with all these definition areas, we didn't want to come up with the numbers. They are really not telling you anything. But we give you some examples, and also later in the Debt for Nature chapter, there you find many deals which are basically based on a blue bond, where it's just included. And there you can see some numbers, and we can see actually that there are also now really some larger ones. So just here, one example we have mentioned here. So here, one example, but on a global level, it's really difficult to aggregate. So again, here it's linked to this SDG 14. So Capo Verde has developed an integrated national financing framework. Means like they have a framework where they try to integrate all the different approaches climate related. And they have issued a bond which should not exceed 10 to 15 million. And the idea was really to provide both economic and environmental benefits, job creation, revenues from tourism, protecting marine. And it was building on the example of the Seychelles, which we present later. So a bit of patience. And what they did in this is really marine protection, sustainable fisheries, and blue tourism. And if you want to have some more information, we have put it in here, and this is this Capo Verde blue note where they really explain like what are the activities, what is the link. And it's really important also that in the link to the national goals, in this case, like this financing framework, so that they are kind of merged. And yeah, there are some challenges also with blue bonds. We start with the benefits. So especially if we are talking about sustainable blue bonds, the idea, as we know it from the typical blue bonds, like the use of proceeds, it's really exclusively for projects aiming at protection of biodiversity and also reducing the loss, which is really important for all the nations which are highly depending on fishery or coastal or have like ecotourism as one of the main income sources. For example, the Maldives, that is their income source. In a way, this also enables to have like a new funding source, and it also raises really awareness of the importance of oceans, because it's sometimes really underestimated still, and also makes it attractive for different investors, as we've shown some examples. And we see there are many debt for nature swaps, which we also have an example where especially blue bonds are included. The other thing that's not only for blue bonds, sustainable blue bonds, but it's in general a bit the question of what is the revenue source behind. So if you are able to find a beneficiary who benefits, like we had in this forestry area, or if you include like a fishery, then you have a revenue model behind where you can really also build it up easily. And you are, otherwise, you're really more dependent on the public finance. So there are often public elements included. The other approach is to finance, to make this more polluter pays principle idea, and to ask the financing based on who is the polluting person in this. We have also later the example of the Rhino Bond, where basically the polluter pays principle is applied, and it's kind of, in this case, means often also you have public finance, especially if it's like a more public good. We have not really principles which are globally accepted, which makes it difficult. We just saw it, like everyone is defining it a bit slightly different, also why it makes it a bit difficult to aggregate it. And there's also not really an agreement on specific KPIs to measure this impact of biodiversity in this context, which makes it more difficult to just compare different investment opportunities or also some of these models. And this is something which we see not only in blue bonds, but also like for biodiversity related bonds at all. But I think that's also a thing of time, it will change. So these were now first the ones which are based on use proceeds. I think which were really, if you are used with green financing, like the green bond principles, there are some we can rely on. Here now it's about more things of ideas where the impact is linked to KPIs. So that really the impact of the biodiversity is at the forefront. So there's a idea behind. So we have, for example, normally, we call it in this kind, it's called environmental impact bond. Sometimes it's conservation bond, but from the idea, you have project developer in behind, and you have this typical structure with an investor with like behind. The idea here is you have somewhere an environmental intervention, which is normally based on either cost savings or benefits. And these are linked to outputs or outcomes. And then it's already now the difference. It's like whether you're linking the KPIs to the forecast or the realized environmental benefits for the achievement, or what you already addressed earlier, Mario, is this idea. So if the payment is based on the realized measurement, so if it's pay on performance. So there are already a bit distinction, but I think it's something we also know from other ideas where it's based on the outcome or the output to see. And then, okay, we have the beneficiaries, and you need normally have a third-party verification, especially if it's in a pay for performance, as we had in the example you presented also earlier. And then we have either a beneficiary or the implementers. They can be the same or different. So what is then basically the innovative part is really to identify here what are good KPIs, which you can really measure or link to outputs and incomes, which really ensure that you have a biodiversity impact. Here, the example here is a forest resilience bond, also from the States. The size is 4 million, and it has fixed repayments based on outputs and cost savings. The idea behind here is that we are depending on ecosystem in a way that our forests are at risk. And with all these measures, they are especially reducing the amount, the expected fires from wildfires from forest. And that's also where the federal states are coming. So the US Federal Forest Agency, they are, based on these activities, have really lower costs in fighting the fires. That's the first. And the second one is the water agency, which, as like the ecosystem is better in place, they're able to really have a better water management system. So there it's really about identifying where or who are the beneficiaries out of this whole complex landscape, to identify also how to involve in this. And the impact is really to reduce forestation, to reduce especially this wildfire risk, resilient biodiversity, and increase watershed protection, and implicitly as also job creation. It's built up in a way, so this is it's called Forest Resilience Bond. It was structured by Blue Forest Conservation, so they're the project sponsors and also the managing partner. And here we have on the one side the US Forestry Agency, which is benefiting from the reduced cost, as like we have a lower amount of fires. And especially also here the water agency, where like the water quality and all this is increased. And so they are kind of the like the beneficiaries. We have investors, and also again here a National Forest Foundation. They are in charge of the restoration contracts and supervising the implementation, and they have to monitor also the restoration activities.
Okay, good. As Christina's mentioned, we are talking now about the Rhino Bond, which is like, well, it's called Rhino Bond, but it's actually the Wildlife Conservation Bond, which is the official name. And it's like an outcome-based bond. It has a 5-year sustainable development bond, but the coupons are then, or coupons fund the rhino conservation, and in this case in the more western part of South Africa, and additionally, like and the KPIs, I will show it in a few slides a bit more in detail, are really like based on the growth in the rhino population in this area. So after 5 years, there's an assessment how much like the population has grown in this protected area, in this area, conservation area, and based on different percentage levels, then a certain payout is then made in addition to the principal. There are many co-benefits associated as well. So on the one hand, yes, we are talking about habitat protection. We're talking about creation of the new business sector as well. In looking at tourism especially, but also like the protection like needs staff like to be involved in the activities. So these are the co-benefits which are also associated with this project. I have a very short video. Really like to show like the relevance. Maybe you can play it now. It's only 1 minute. It's not too long. I have to do it. Sorry.
I'm Esther van der Merwe. I'm a black rhino monitoring technician in Addo Elephant National Park. Rhinos are a very iconic species. They help with nutrient recycling within the ecosystems. They also open up areas for smaller animals to also be able to get in there. They help with seed dispersals. They really are very valuable to the ecosystem. For me, rhino monitoring is a passion. It's not just a job. I am intrigued by their social structures, by the way they interact with each other, by the way they conduct themselves in the field. So you cannot just go in and make a change without understanding a black rhino population. It is extremely important to know first what's happening on the ground before you make any decisions for conservation purposes. The Wildlife Conservation Bond has enabled us to do our jobs at an extremely high level by giving us the funds that is needed for aerial monitoring, the funds that's needed for camera trapping, and for us to be able to be out in the field and do this 24/7, to look at them, to know exactly what's happening in our population.
I will stop it here. So let's not like a bit like the impression, like with the fund or the proceeds of the funding, as she has said, like in the two areas, they're really able to specialize and also to professionalize like the rhino monitoring as well. So we're talking about 2 inventory reserves on one national park, which is the other elephant, where she was from, and then also like the Great Fish River Nature Reserve. So this is a bit the structure, how it looks like. So it's by the EBRD, which is belong to the World Bank. So they are they're receiving from different investors. And this video was produced by one of the main investors in this fund or in this bond. And they get the principal after 5 years, as I have said, like depending on the rhino growth rate, they will get like a conservation success payment. If we will see it in the next slide. If it's not achieved, then also like the payment will be less, or even there will be no additional payment. It's important to mention there are 2 like agencies. Like one is like the calculation agent, which is a Conservation Alpha. They are providing like the growth rate calculation report, in order to measure the impact. On the other hand, there's a verification agency, CLS, is Zoological Society in London. They are also providing, on the one hand, like the verifying the information, as well as they also both agents are also like training the local staff also concerning rhino data management systems. Importantly, like this conservation success payment is a grant, and this is provided by Jeff. So the Jeff is in this case, as you see it here, like really like providing grant in order to make this, investment also, and this bond also interesting for investors. I have talked about the KPIs. So here we have the KPIs, and they are. So we are talking about this conservation success payment by Jeff, about 30.76 million. And as I said, it's linked to the rhino growth rate. So in this case, if there's no growth rate, there's no success payment. In the growth rate is between 0 and 2, then it's $36.69 payout based on 1,000 US dollars invested, and so on. And if there's even like a bit, and this is scaled up concerning like how the growth rate is performing. So this is like an example how certain KPIs can support in order to generate, on the one hand, in this case, wildlife conservation, but also like make it interesting for investors.
But it's also based on Jeff funding in this case. So that's what we meant. Like in some areas, like just for conservation, it's also really not always possible to just make it on a commercial basis. A question, Francesca?
Thanks for providing these details. Just curious about the timing. When was the bond issued, and what's the current phase of the project, if you know? Just
I think it was recently 2022, if I'm not wrong.
Okay.
So like the payout is still
so maybe on
pending.
the Jeff website we can look for some of the initial results, just to see where we are, in between the 3 different scenarios there. That would be very nice to look for. Okay.
And always we have the sources down on the slides and with links. So if you just click on them, it gives you further information.
Thank you.
Good. Then we now switch to really a different approach. It's called Project Finance for Performance. It's mainly often not really known, and it's unfortunately also not really, you don't see it too much, but it has really some interesting ideas, because it's really an idea to have an approach, more like not all single initiatives, that really tries to make an impact on policy changes and link it to funding necessary to meet really specific conservation goals. So it's more like a program defined over a long time framework with the ultimate aim to achieve ecological, social, political, organization, and financial stability. Again, I think Mario can maybe also later give some ideas from this Amazon example, because it's slightly similar, but the idea is really to develop, like really establish a precondition for conservation to understand where we are and really come up with a long-term conservation plan, what to achieve, which is especially important as we have it in really, if ecosystems are within different governments or regions, to really have not a single solution, because landscape conservation requires it depends on the landscape, so it does not stop with a city or a political border, it's a landscape. And then it has to find the financing, so it's often with fund structures, and then it's linked to conservation programs. And the ML elements is really to prepare like a project for a performance idea to a bit like from the project finance idea to ring fence some projects, to bundle them, to have really a one program with clear goals, which are really all, so it's really a holistic approach. To also think like which are the organizations to come up really legal structure, and also the governments to really come up on agreement. What is really the requirements? What is the overall standards we want to achieve? Or, for example, things that are not done in this whole landscape to really have a good governance. Then the next part is to think of fundraising. So typically it's really with public finance, but to really to come up with a fund which is then used to implement this programmatic approach, and to really close and really have the hand on the implementation. So the goal is really to secure from an ecological side, the whole landscape, and to have also like a financing source behind organization, but especially also the political and social sustainability. To really ignore where the political borders are, but it's really about the conservation approach for one ecosystem. And it's normally for large scale. So like the Amazon Basin is one idea, or like also the Congo Basin, where such an approach could be really good to have one conservation plan to achieve. But it takes Kaiser. So there exists an example, but it's, you see also from the dates, it's a bit more older. It takes quite a lot of time just in the preparation. As normally, as first bringing together the different parties to find a common agreement, what is really the purpose you want to achieve with this conservation, and really come to this agreement. In this case, they really started in 2007, and it started the implementation in 2011. And it was in an area of 1 million hectares, terrestrial protection and also marine protection, with a donor funding of 75 million and expected in-country funds from 20 million. And it's really an example from one country. So. But I think maybe you can share the idea what is existing in the Amazon Basin. It's slightly different, but still has some same elements.
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, what we have been doing here in the country, the Inter-American Development Bank, they created this multi-donor trust fund called Amazon Initiative, Bioeconomy and Deforestation Multi-Donor Trust Fund, something like that, in which they aims to support development projects within the Amazon Basin. Basically, different proposals can be delivered to this fund, and one of those were related to a proposal from an indigenous reservoir in the Amazon, in the Colombian part. Basically, this indigenous reservoir, they own some land in the Amazonia, and they made this kind of partnership with this technology firm applying blockchain, in which they established a grid in this land in order to estimate the value of per hectare, in order to assess the value of CO2 emissions or reforestation services. So they create through blockchain a non-financial token. This NFT then was included within this private marketplace called Indie Token Fund or something, in which private investors, individuals, they can buy these tokens, and through the use of these proceeds, they finance the reforestation of protection projects they have within the reservoir. So it's a pilot project. It's not very big. We are talking about a ticket around 200K or something. It's very, very small. But the rationale behind this is just to create this pilot project in order to establish a minimum viable product in the market, in order to see if this works, then can be scale up in other fields or in other regions within the basin. That is basically what we are doing in terms of linking technology, blended finance, and biodiversity.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of similar, just that this approach has like more also this holistic approach with the policy, like with the really framework, but otherwise that's the basic idea. And what I like about the example you shared is, especially in biodiversity, I think, and we had it with this SDG plus D, this digital, this offers really a great opportunity. In this case, we are talking about biodiversity offsets, which can be really a revenue source, but especially for the monitoring, I think with satellite data, there are really some projects which are just observing about satellite data, whether the land management system has been in place according to the terms and whatever, so that the digitalization will help to really ensure this monitoring and implementation, this tracking of these. So I think the reason why it's not yet too much visible, it's like also it makes sense. You need to have really a case where it makes sense, right? Larger ecosystems. And I think especially beneficial if you have many countries involved, where a landscape approach makes sense. I think a good idea for other ideas in this direction is also WWF, which is really more coming from the conservation side. The benefit is normally can really leverage finance and really has an approach for transactional influence on one landscape. And also it gives really attention to this topic. And in this case also it's in a revenue source for especially also indigenous people living in this area. What is kind of the challenge is really you need to have really strong national governance and also legal structures or to ensure that you can really set it up, and the high-level political commitment that countries have to work together to find one approach, and really that's also the different ministries. And the other thing is like the high capacity. As she was really mentioning also in the rhino field, you need to first understand the benefit of the rhino, how they work and what is their impact before you can start to think of a good conservation project. So that's the same here also, that is a bit more complex because we are talking about the whole ecosystem. So not just a small park or one animal, it's an ecosystem. And often it requires really concessional funding or public funding for these type of conservation efforts. Good, I think officially.
Are there any questions?
Well, I think people are input is slowly be to.
Yes, please, Alfonso.
Yeah, thank you. From your point of view, there is so many challenges here to make financial sustainable and to create a market that led these all sustainable criteria or benefits that we have to generate, convert these in economics metrics, are in economics benefits from investors or for the project. So from your point of view, you think we have to change the way we are doing financing right now? Or you think all these concepts, we have to create new measurements to let them get into our financial point of view?
I'm not sure I completely understood the question itself.
How can we measure the benefits that all these concepts of sustainability into a cash flow, for example, to measure benefits or to measure the reduce of cost of impacts in the nature or in our society in order to monetize these benefits in a financial market?
Yeah, I think this is one of the main discussions. It's like, what is the value, for example, of a rhino? Currently, we said it earlier, there are many approaches out there, how you can convert it, but what I don't actually see is like one where the market is picking it up. So it's the one side is really, I don't know, this one publication we mentioned from WWF, they try to do is with the scoring system, which is then providing the impact, but not with the value of the impact monetized, what you were mentioning. So,
do you think the carbon markets will be the way we can monetize these kind of impacts?
Yeah, more the biodiversity offsets, but yeah, maybe. Well, that's really difficult to say at the moment. I think that's really, you pointed really to the, currently the main challenge is really to monetize the impact which we need in the end. That's really tricky. I know.
Yeah. Maybe just an example, like from a different field, like no, we were talking about biodiversity, we saw just, okay, this is quite difficult. When we're talking about climate change, no, like with mitigation, more or less, we have all good understanding. We have it discussed in the last 2 days as well, how to monetize and how to transform this to financial numbers. With adaptation, like when you're looking back, for example, like 5-10 years ago, for example, it was also very, very niche. And then like really because there you're working first with a lot of uncertainty, no? Because you have more or less with scientific knowledge, etc. You know how, for example, climate change might impact certain assets, but you can also, in this case, then what you have can then you have to calculate rather with avoided costs. For example, when you are, for example, investing in a adaptation measure, no, then you have to calculate with avoided cost. I would say, I don't know, Christine, what do you think? But I think it would go a bit to the similar direction, because we're also talking about like biodiversity, and it's also a lot of uncertainty because the knowledge base is not that established as we would need it.
Picking up what we had yesterday with GHG accounting for the project approach, if you are able to put up a baseline and see, like, if you implement your project differently and you're able to calculate the avoided cost or the avoided impact, then you can monetize it. But the difference is like, how to put a price on like maintaining the Amazon forest. There are really huge scientific debates, because this is a slightly different question. It's like, the one is like, if you have really in business and you can see, for example, due to, I don't know, less bees or whatever, it has impact on your productivity, then you can have like a baseline scenario and you can say, okay, if I don't know, measure X, Y, Z, it will increase my productivity again, and then I can measure it and without problems. But the current discussions where it's, what is the price of preserving a rhino? And that's a mix of ethical, scientific, whatever discussion.
But on the other hand, it's good that we have this discussion. No?
Good. It's artificially split in 2 sessions, but basically the next one is also building up on instruments. But so does it work if I swip on? No? So. Now? What do I see how it works?
As soon as the slide switches, or the screen switches to the other.
So it's about depth for nature swaps. And you will see some examples back. So we will really shortly have a look. What is the depth for nature swaps? Also, they are now also sometimes depth for climate swaps. So you see this tendency that it has also often many names. Also the principles underlying similar. We will show a bit more detail the example of Seychelles and Belize.